I don't understand the concept of like crying at a book. A movie or something is different, but reading it on a page, I just don't understand that concept.
1, 2, 3, let's switch this up.
Hello and welcome back, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Today I am going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag, which I'm sure you've seen a bazillion of because it's just that time of the year where that's what everybody's doing right now. So starting off with question number 1, we're just going to jump right into it. No need to introduce the tag, like you guys know what it is. If you somehow made your way to this video, then I'm sure you are familiar with the mid-year freakout tag, where we're basically going to do a check-in with all the books that we've read from January up to this point. So we're gonna jump right in with the first question, which is what is the best book that I've read so far this year? Now, just as like a preface for this video, most of these questions, if not probably all of these questions, are going to have more than one answer. To answer the question about what my favorite book is that I've read so far this year, if you didn't already see this sitting right here, I don't know if the camera can see this book right here, but the first book is Ace, and I read this back in February. It's actually called Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. That's a really long title, so I just call it Ace. And most times when you say Ace and you say Angela Chen, people that have read the book at least know what you're talking about. This book was phenomenal. I need to go back and like tab it. I have all of my like annotations and stuff on my phone because like I read some of this book on my phone, and for me it's easier to annotate electronically or like digitally. A lot of times I'll do it digitally, and then if I have enough where it's worth me transferring it to a physical copy, then I'll do that. I have not done that with this book yet, but I will. I absolutely have to, because this book was insane, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't tabbed it yet, is because there are so many things that I would want to highlight and tab that it's going to take me a while to go through and do that. So I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but I highly recommend this book. Pretty much is self-explanatory about what it's about. It literally says it in the title. This is a book that everyone can read and take something away from this, because this also explores things like consent. It also explores things in terms of like sexism and things like that. Like there are just so many things that are talked about in this book. Highly recommend. I think that everybody should read this book. And then the other book that I would say is my favorite book that I've read this year, which that book is a nonfiction, but this one is fiction, and this is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. And if you have been a part of my channel for a while, then you remember when I read this book. I vlogged it. There's a whole vlog when I read this, and I had no idea going into this book that I was going to love it as much as I did. I had never read anything by Abby Jimenez before, and honestly the synopsis on the back wasn't really that appealing, wasn't really that interesting, if I'm being honest. I probably would not have read this book if it were not for the fact that I was given this as an arc. I think one of the things that I like the most about this book is the representation when it comes to like mental health, specifically like anxiety and social anxiety. This book was just the greatest thing that I've ever read, because I've never felt more seen and more understood than I did when I was reading this book. I was reading this book and I'm like, Abby Jimenez gets it. This was chef's kiss. Best fiction book that I read all year. The next question is, what is the best sequel that you've read this year? And truthfully, I haven't really read many sequels, so this question is kind of easy to answer because literally I've only read one sequel. Now, if this question is going to allow me to bend the rules a little bit and do like what's the best book in a series that you've read that isn't necessarily like a sequel, like to me a sequel is the second book. So if it's book 4 in the series, then that's no longer the sequel, but we're gonna pretend like that rule doesn't apply. And so if we're going with the fact that that rule doesn't apply, then ACOTAR is the best book, the best sequel that I've read. I really enjoyed this. This is my favorite book in the ACOTAR series. I will talk about the ACOTAR series a little bit later in this video, but out of the ones that I've read up to A Court of Frost and Starlight. Out of, you know, beginning to that, this is my favorite book in the series, which is actually kind of funny because a lot of people don't really care for this book. A lot of people say this is like their least favorite book because of all the war and politics, but for me, that's what made me love this book. That's the reason why I like this book so much. So yeah, this is my favorite book in the series so far. If we're sticking to the rules and like an actual sequel, an actual second book in the series, then by default it has to go to Death Note, because Death Note is the only sequel that I've read this year. And this was really good. Like this whole series, I read the first 3 so far. So if you are interested in getting into manga and you like mind games and like strategy and stuff like that, I would definitely recommend Death Note. The next question is, what are some new releases that you want to read but have not read yet. And I have quite a few because there were some books that I talked about last year that were like my most anticipated reads for the year that I have not read yet. There are 4 that I'd like to read that I haven't read yet but are already out, and that is The Reunion by Kayla Olson, The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren, Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, and The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Those are 4 books that I believe are out already that came out this year, obviously, that I have not read yet, and I would like to very much read and get around to it. The next question is, what are the most anticipated releases for the remaining half of the year? And I don't really have a ton. Most of the books that I was excited to read or excited to be coming out in 2023 have come out already between January and June. Most of them are already out. I would say off the top of my head, the only 2 books that I can think of that are not out yet that I am like very much looking forward to and like can't wait for it to be released is One of Us Is Back by Karen M. McManus. And for that one, I'm not like in love with that series, but I did read the first 2. The first one I wasn't crazy about. The second one I thought was actually better. It's kind of like split down the middle. I feel like half the people say the first book is better, then half the people say the second book is better. I fall into the latter category. At this point, I'm already invested in the series and in the characters, so I'm just at this point curious to read the next book. So I believe that comes out in July, I want to say, of this year. And then Iron Flame, which is the second book in the Fourth Wing series. I don't remember what the actual series is called. It starts with an E, whatever it is. I'll like insert it on the screen somewhere. But I call it the Fourth Wing series. But it's the second book in that, and I believe that comes out in November, and I've already pre-ordered it. So I am very excited to read that book when it comes out, just because Fourth Wing had so much hype. And I don't know if this video is going to come out before or after my Fourth Wing reading vlog, but Fourth Wing was so hyped, as I'm sure you are already fully aware, that I'm just curious to see if the second book is going to deliver in the same way, or if not better, hopefully, than the first book did. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. Next question is, what is the biggest disappointment of the year so far? And I have 2. One of them was just disappointing because of all the hype that it had. I was expecting, I don't really know what I was expecting, honestly. I just was expecting something that I didn't get. I don't know. And that is Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. And I think maybe what I've been told and like what I've been hearing is that maybe I should not have read that book first. That book is a prequel to the Throne of Glass series, but it didn't come out first. I think it came out as like, I don't know, the 3rd or 4th book in the series or whatever. But I think what I had a difficult time with is that it's a bunch of short stories, but it's about characters that like I don't know anything about and I honestly don't care about. And so I guess maybe if I had read it in publishing order, by the time I got to that book, I would have some foundation for who these characters were, and maybe I would feel connected to some of them or whatever. And so reading the backstory would, you know, just enhance my connection to these characters or my understanding of the story or whatever. But because I didn't have any foundation, any background knowledge on like who these characters were, I had no reason to care about them. Reading these very short stories where you don't really get any character development and stuff like that, it just left me feeling very, I don't know what the word is, I just didn't care. The next book that was actually a disappointment, and if you've been on my channel for a while, then you probably already know what I'm gonna say, and that is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Basterica. And I was just so disappointed. Like, that's a great word to use when it comes to this book. I was so disappointed. This book had so much potential and it just did not deliver as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this book because, again, this is another book that I did a whole reading vlog on, so if you want to see my thoughts, you can go check that out. I'll have it like linked or whatever. This book is basically about what it would be like to live in a society where it is now legal to eat human flesh because it is no longer safe to eat the animal meat on the planet. Now, the conspiracy is that the government has done something to the animals so that people can't eat them, so that they are then forced to eat human flesh as a form of population control. Now, all of that sounded great, sounded so interesting, couldn't wait to read it. Read it, did not deliver, was super boring. The next question is, what's been the biggest surprise so far this year? So this was very surprising because, to be honest, this is a book that I wanted to read last year, and then I didn't get around to it. And then I had watched some reviews of people reading this book, and they didn't really have like the best things to say about it. They didn't say that it was like bad, but it wasn't like, you know, raving reviews or anything like that. So I kind of just like pushed it to the back burner, was like, I'll read it eventually one day, maybe, or maybe not. But then when the buzzword challenge came out, one of the buzzword, I think it was the buzzword for June or May, I think it's June, was other. So I read 100 Other Girls, and that's literally the only reason why I read this book this year. But I ended up loving it. This book was great. This book basically follows Nora, and Nora is like, she's a writer for a print magazine that also has like a digital component to it, like a, you know, an online site or whatever. There's a lot of commentary on like women in the workplace and culture and sexuality. This book just surprised me. Like, I was not expecting to have enjoyed this book as much as I did. I thought this book was really great, and I definitely would recommend this book. And then the last book that surprised me was actually is this middle grade, I guess, considered maybe? Are You There, Goddess Me, Margaret. And this book, let me tell you, Margaret is hilarious. This book was hilarious. I was laughing. I was like laughing, shaking my head, like embarrassed, being like, wow, is this what I was thinking when I was 12 years old? Like, it was just such a good time, such an easy read. It's like such a short book. I think the audio is maybe 2 or 3 hours, like very quick. But this book was so much fun. I loved Margaret's like internal dialogue. I wasn't expecting to be having so much fun reading this like children's book, basically. Highly recommend if you are like me and have not read this book yet. The next question is favorite new author, and I have two, and technically I wouldn't say that they are my favorite author, but they are two authors that I had never read until this year, but I just haven't read enough of their work. I've only read one book for each of these authors, so I can't say for certain, but I'm pretty confident that more than likely these authors will make it onto that list, and that is Abby Jimenez, who wrote Yours Truly, which I talked about earlier, and Lynn Painter, who wrote Better Than Movies. That's one of the books that she's like most, you know, known for. And she wrote The Do-Over, which is the book that I read back in February, and that was a repeating day rom-com, which I really enjoyed, gave it 5 stars. So yeah, those are two authors that I definitely want to read more from, and I think that if their books continue to be as enjoyable as The Do-Over and Yours Truly were, then I probably will be adding them to my list of favorite authors. Next question is newest fictional crush, and again, talking about Yours Truly, I told you that this book would come up multiple times in this video. Jacob from Yours Truly is the definition of the man that I want in my life. He is like my ideal man. Like, he is perfection. Obviously he's fictional, which is why he's so perfect, but you know what, a girl can dream, a girl can hope, can't she? And then in close second is Sam from One True Loves, which is a book that I recently read, and he just broke my heart. Like, reading that book, my heart was breaking for Sam. Next question is newest favorite characters, and going back to books that I've already talked about, Margaret from Are You There, Goddess Me, Margaret. Like I said, that girl was a riot. Her inner thoughts were hilarious. If I could go back in time and be 12 years old again, I would want to be her best friend because she keeps it so real. I love that girl. Loving the Time of Serial Killers, Phoebe. Really love Phoebe, mainly because Phoebe reminded me so much of myself. So I think that's why I liked her, because I could just like identify with her and understand her so much. The next question is, what is a book that made you cry? And before I answer this question, I just want to be clear that I was not crying, like sobbing at this book. First of all, a tear or two may have trickled, you know, out of my eyeballs, and that's it, okay? Second of all, I would also like to clarify that I was listening to this part of the audiobook. I wasn't physically reading the pages, I was listening to it. But the book is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And what's crazy about the part that made me cry on this book, the part of the book that made me cry was a part that I had already read, right? So like, she writes a letter to her husband, and she writes the letter like pretty early in the book. It's kind of a way for her to like process what's happened and like put that in the past so that she can move forward. So she writes the letter, you read the letter, and you move on. And then the letter comes up again later on, like towards the end of the book. She rereads the letter, and for some reason when she reread it, it hit hard, and my eyes started watering, and I was just getting so emotional. And I literally don't know why, because I literally read this exact letter so many chapters before and it did nothing to me. And I don't know if it was maybe because now we're seeing how things are playing out and you already know at this point like who she's gonna choose, that this letter like hit different at the end of the book. But my eyes started watering and I was like, what is happening to me? What is going on? And this is another book that I did like a reading vlog for. So I definitely recommend. If you don't know what this book is about, this book is basically about a girl who is married to this guy that she's been with for like a decade. They get married and on their 1-year anniversary he leaves on like a work trip or something, and then he goes missing, and they basically assume that he's dead because he's been missing for like 2 or 3 years at this point. And so during that 2 or 3 years she grieves, and then she moves on, she meets another guy and gets engaged. So now she's engaged, and then it turns out that her husband isn't dead and that he's coming home. That's like the gist of what this book is about. It's about so much more than that. On the flip side of that, a book that made me happy was a book that I thought was hilarious from start to finish. This book was so funny. It is another nonfiction book, and that is How to Date Men When You Hate Men by Blythe Robertson. This book was so funny. Also this cover, this is one of my favorite covers. It's a very comical look from the perspective of a woman who's very aware of her privilege, talking about men and what it's like to date in, you know, this generation, in this society, as a millennial / Gen Z, like just what the dating pool is like for women at this point and how it is atrocious. And it's just really funny. Like, you have to read this book to really understand. Like, it will be too much for me to try to go into all the different things that she talks about. She talks about like different stages of dating, whether it's like talking or like actually going out on dates or being in relationships, and the type of guys that she doesn't like and the different reasons why she doesn't like them. And it's, like I said, it's hilarious. Definitely recommend. If you want a good like palate cleanser that's very lighthearted, very low stakes, funny, but also like super relatable, then definitely give this a read. This book was so good. The next question is, what is the most beautiful book that you have picked up this year? I do like Under the Whispering Door. It's a book that I haven't read yet, but I do own it, and that cover is pretty. The next question is, what are the books that you need to read before the year is over? And I would say all the books that I talked about earlier, all the ones that are already out that I haven't read yet. But I also need to read A Court of Silver Flame. Have not read this yet. This is the last book in the series, or at least up to this point it's the last book in the series, and I have not read it yet. As you can see, it's a chunker, so that's the reason why I haven't read it yet. Reading this book is like the equivalent of me reading like 2 or 3 books. So when I have like other books that I need to get through, this one kind of gets pushed to the back burner because I just know how much time it's going to take for me to read this, because this book is like 750 pages. So I talked about this earlier, but I want to read more books by Lynn Painter and Abby Jimenez. That is definitely something that I would like to do before the end of the year, mainly because I want to decide, like, are these 2 authors going to make it onto my list of favorite authors, which the list, by the way, is very short. But that concludes my mid-year freakout tag. Let me know down below what some of your favorites or not favorites were up to this point so far in the year. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I've talked about, or any of the authors that I've talked about, if any of the most anticipated are also on your list of most anticipated, if you've read any of my you know, new releases that I want to read but I haven't read yet. Like, let me know all of that down below in the comments. As always, my socials and links will be down below in the description. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.